Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 19th of October 2021. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics here. Great to have you on tonight, and a very exciting conversation we're going to have all about property and all the dynamics around property with Veronica Morgan. She's standing by ready to come on. Just before I bring her in, I will just remind you as normal that this isn't financial or legal advice. The chat is being moderated, so just be a bit careful there. This is as of the 19th of October. And if you want to get my attention to ask a question, use that Walk the World. That'll be the best way to make sure that I see that you're asking a question. Very happy for you to have conversations going on in the chat, but if you want to ask a question, use that Walk the World. I've also enabled Super Chat, which allows you to get your questions at the top of the list, or indeed, if you want to make a contribution to help us fund what we do here, that would be great too. We do this because we think it's really important, not because we're trying to make any money out of it. So every dollar that's given to us, we invest it in more content and more shows. Now, with that introduction, and without further ado, let me push this button and hopefully bring Veronica in. Now, let's have a look. Are you there, Veronica? Let's have a look. Yay!
It works.
Hopefully the sound too.
Oh.
Yeah?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Oh,
can you hear
hello.
me? All good.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Oh, good. It's a mad old world we're in, isn't it?
It is a very mad world. It gets a bit madder. Maybe it's my age, but it seems to me it's getting more and more mad by the day.
I'm even going to put my chair up a little bit so I'm higher. So when I'm on there with, whoops, I've just gone down. There we go. So when we're side by side, I don't look so little. I'm all blurry though. My camera's gone a bit weird.
Yeah, I did say to you, you actually were blurry, and then it went fine, and then it's gone again. So it looks as though the focusing is a bit weak. Well, never mind. We can still hear you, and we can get the general impression.
I'm of that age now where a fuzzy focus is actually really flattering.
Yeah. Well, they do that with some of the cameras. They've got this sort of beauty setting, right, which just makes things a bit blurry. So there you go.
They do indeed. That's really terrible. My camera's just crapped itself like that. But anyway,
no problems. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Now, let's just introduce you for those who may not know you. I have to say that whenever I write my little spiel in the YouTube thing for you, it always goes a lot. It's a very long one, right? Because you do so much.
Yeah, I'm a bit busy. I sound really impressive, don't I? I've been on the planet a long time, though, so I've had a lot of time to do this.
Yeah, but you just give us a quick rundown.
Well, I guess I've been in real estate game now for 21 years, and I started off as a sales agent before becoming a buyer's agent about 15 years ago. But one of the things that I love about property is that it's really all about psychology. It's not just the bricks and mortar. And the longer I'm in this game, the more and more I just want to help people make better decisions, because I just can see, it's a long game, property, right? So the longer you're in it, the longer you see the benefits of making good decisions and the shockers that some people line themselves up for by making bad decisions. So everything I'm doing, we've got a podcast, The Elephant in the Room, another one, Your First Home Buyer Guide, and now we've got Home Buyer Academy, which is online course and mentoring for first home buyers. So everything I'm doing now is really aimed at helping people who want to make better decisions around property.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I run these one-to-one sessions, and it's been ever so busy the last few months. More and more people that I speak with are more and more confused about what's going on, right? It's probably going up. Is it not going up? What's going to happen? And I keep saying, I don't know. I have no idea what the future holds, right? And, I run different scenarios, but they're only scenarios, right? It's really interesting how many people are looking for a simple, straightforward message about what's going to happen when you can't give it.
No, and this is that along with, where should I buy an investment property, and all those really simple questions that seem like they should have a simple answer that never do. And that is one of the classics. It's like, I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future, but I tell you what I can tell you. I can tell you that there are some glaring mistakes that if you avoid making those, you won't regret, either buying or not buying a property. And that there's a lot of education that you need to do so that you can actually make confident decisions, even in a world of uncertainty. You can still make good decisions. And I think that that's so important. And that's something that I've been working a lot this year, actually, is that sort of idea of, this world, I think, I'm not sure we're ever going to move to a state of certainty again. Do you think? I mean, and even if we did in the past, it was all a figment of our imaginations anyway.
Well, I was going to say, to my mind, there has always been uncertainty. It's just that it was not very much exposed, whereas now it's much more exposed, so people can get much more aware of just how fragile things are. And I think that, the last 18 months has shown us that some of the certainties that we assumed are always there aren't necessarily always there. So that's another lesson in terms of actually understanding how to deal with these things. But, it is fascinating when I talk with people, because some people, come in with a very fixed idea about what they want to do from a property perspective, right? Without necessarily having done any work at all. So it's almost like it comes from somewhere other than logic, right? And it's either because they've seen something on YouTube, or they've read something, or they've been talking to somebody over a barbecue. It's not a good place to start the conversation, though, is it?
No, it isn't. And the problem is, of course, and particularly in this country, is that there's so much hope pinned on, or so much of my self-worth pinned on sort of my property story. And I still can't believe the amount of people out there, trying to gather an amount of properties and sort of judge themselves as to how successful they are by how many properties that they own. And we get approached, particularly for the elephant in the room. And I've had a few people come to me and say, why don't you have some property stories from, young people in their 20s that are doing really well? And I'm like, because the young people in their 20s that are doing really well, that they don't know whether they're doing really well or not yet. They need to at least have held these properties for, I think, a good decade to actually be able to judge whether they made a good decision in the first place or not. So sorry, no one in their 20s, unless they bought something in their teens, has actually been in the game long enough for me to actually have confidence that they've got it right. They might have it right, but I'm going to give it another 10 years or so before we work it out whether they do have it right. So I think that there's all these sort of this lovely idealism around property. And look, let me tell you, I get it right and you can do very, very well in life, but it's much easier to get it wrong than it is to get it right. And sort of therefore it's a scary proposition for people to jump in boots and all without actually properly evaluating, properly setting their goals, properly understanding the risks, all of that sort of stuff. All the stuff that you bang on about all the time, hey, Martin?
I know. It's a bit like a cracked record, but it is important, right? Because there are so many things. And you made the point a little while ago that, just not doing some silly, obvious things, right, that are wrong can make a big difference, right?
Yeah.
But quite often, I'm sort of pulled in at the point where they've already started making those bad decisions and they're trying to backpedal from them. And, one of my observations is it's quite hard to extract yourself from a really bad property purchase.
I think a big issue is that people see the actual acquisition as a success. And it sort of goes to... like I talk to a lot of first home buyers, and they really start off thinking, all I've got to do is buy it. Once I've bought it, I've succeeded. The investors think, once I've got these in my portfolio, I've succeeded. Even hiring a buyer's agent. There's a lot of buyer's agents who just take your brief, go, yeah, I'll get you one of those. There's no critical thinking that comes into it because they measure success on, did you buy a property? And I think that is the problem. When you've got a very long-term, you've got an asset that needs to have a long-term focus to make good decisions and to actually ride out many waves, ups and downs, and all the rest of it. You've got an asset that actually needs time to actually work. But if you bought a bad one, the longer you're in it, the worse off you are. It's a trick and the mess, and trying to accept that you've made mistakes and dig yourself out of it. And of course, if you're the idiot that bought it and nobody else wants to buy it, there's all of that goes on. The horror of it, no one can imagine that unless they've actually experienced it. And no one wants to talk about it.
That's exactly right. It's funny, there aren't that many YouTube videos about my property disaster, are there, right? All the people on YouTube are the ones who've bought 6 properties in 6 months for $60,000 and it's all gone wonderfully well. Well, what about the 90% who haven't?
What about we could do a new channel, Martin. My property stuff-ups.
Well, I've had the view for a long time that what we need is we need some property mechanics, right? We need people who actually talks about it, warts and all, right, and helps people to understand that there are some basic things that have to be done, and if you do those things right, there's more chance. But also, you've got to spell out, the bad parts. It's like when you've got an older car and you start seeing rust buckets and things like that around it. You need to get the true story, right? Otherwise, people are just deceived all the time with this sort of spruiking, and there's so many people who do spruik property, and frankly, a lot of them seem to be advertising on my channel before I come on.
So the moral of that story is anybody advertising on Martin's channel, you probably shouldn't take any notice. Do you avoid ads if you pay for YouTube?
No, I don't know, but at the moment, my view is if they're happy to advertise on my channel, they're going to send me money, so that's good.
I think, it's interesting. I mean, certainly before I met you the first time, I thought, oh, that bloody Martin North, all he does is talk down the property market. He's so negative, and there he goes again. He's 40%, overvalued doom and gloom stories. And there is always a bit of a problem, with those blanket statements and people assuming that that's, there's no nuance in what you're saying. And the very first time I interviewed you on our podcast, and I thought we were going to have a fight the whole time through. And by the end of it, we're like best buddies. Oh, God, we actually agree with each other. What's this all about? This is really weird. But, the problem is that there's no nuance. You do have the doom and gloomers. You've got your Steve Keens and you're running around. The 40%, it's just the magic number, isn't it? And look, it didn't come true last year, but it will come true one day. And then you're on the other side of the spectrum, you've got the perennial bears, or the bulls, I should say, the bulls. And you've got property safest houses, can't go wrong, rising tide lifts all ships, and all these sort of bullshit that is peddled in the property space. That you can see it, and therefore if you can see it, you can't lose money, and property doubles every 10 years is one of your favourite ones. I'm finding, I love that comment there, acquisitions. I'm going to use that quote, even though I said it. I've never used it before. I'm going to use it.
Frame it, capture it. That's a really good one.
It's a great one, isn't it? But, that this so much over positivity, trying to spruik and trying to sell the whole time. And this is there's so much wrong with the property industry. And I'm a licensed real estate agent. Hey, I've been doing it for 21 years. But there is so much wrong with my industry because it's all about selling and it's not about understanding, the power of good property decisions and helping people make good property decisions. But what I've realised, if there's only 10% of properties worth owning, then not everyone can possibly get good advice. It's not possible because it's going to stuff up the whole economy. If everyone just focuses on the 10% of properties that should be bought, then that's going to push the prices up of those 10%. Anyway, the point being, the economy won't survive it. So I'm only out here if I reckon the 10% of people that want to make good decisions.
Well, there's 9 trillion worth of property out there at the moment, right? And so on a rule of thumb basis, about 10% of that's probably really appropriately valued. But there's a lot of it probably that isn't. It's probably not worth the paper it's written on, as it were. I do a lot of work in the high-rise sector because there are so many people from my one-to-ones who've made really bad decisions in high-rise purchases, right? I sort of talk about North Ryde quite a lot because quite a few people that I've been working with have been there. But, they bought some years ago, and prices are down still 20-25% from what they bought. and the hard conversation is, well, there's no guarantee that things are going to go any better ahead. Sometimes cutting your losses and getting out is actually the right thing to do.
Yeah. It's, there's there's a particular bias around that. I've totally forgotten what it's called, but it is very difficult to admit you made a mistake, and B, face it, and the pain of loss, like the loss aversion, that's the thing. The pain of losing something is so much greater than the actual joy of winning something. They've actually done studies on this. If you pick up a $50 note, you feel pretty good if you just happen to see it lying on the ground. But if you lose one, you feel worse. The strength of the feeling is worse than the strength of the joy. And so, of course, and also a lot of these people that buy into these high rises and also the house and land packages as well, they then help their friends pile in. So, then you got to admit you got it wrong. You've got to sheepishly admit to your friends as well. But, I guess the thing is, and I think there was just a comment that just popped up there, but I didn't get to read it properly. I think there's somebody saying that their property doubled in 10 years. It's possible. Absolutely, it's possible. There are definitely properties. Absolutely. The properties that I bought for clients, there's properties that I've evaluated for clients and haven't bought. There are loads of properties out there that actually have doubled and have the potential to double every 10 years. But it's a small percentage of the total pot, and so it's the art is about, and the science, I guess, is the alchemy, doing really good or making really good decisions. It's all about the alchemy of art and science, is working out which ones of those, thousands of properties. How many properties are out there, Martin? There's lots. Are there millions? I don't know.
There's 10. There's about 10.5 million properties, and there's about 9 and a bit million households. So there's about 1.2 or 1.3 million spare properties in Australia at the moment.
Right, spare property. That's funny. Okay, well, there you go. Don't buy a spare property.
Undersupply? No. There's plenty of supply. It may not be where people want it, but no. And interesting, when the new census comes out in a few months, I suspect we're going to see even more spare properties because we've had huge amounts of building. A lot of people, of course, have got model properties. But no, the mythology of undersupply is, of course, spruiked by the construction sector and politicians and everything else. There's a current inquiry at the moment, of course. Property supply, that's the federal government's little mantra because they can blame the states. But no, that's not where the real issue is.
There's so many different parties in this argument. I was reading a report recently by, I think it was commissioned by the local government associations, or there's some association that represents local councils. And of course, they were arguing that they are not the constraint, they are not the bottleneck. Then you've got other papers that are being put forward. We interviewed, what's his name? Mental blank. Got an episode of the podcast coming up very soon, which is with an economist whose name has absolutely escaped me, who's put a submission in on affordability. It's all about you got to lift the constraints on supply to create more supply, and that's going to solve the affordability problem. The problem is, yeah, sure, it does create affordable properties, right, for some people. I mean, affordability is about rent as well, Sure, there's a massive supply of apartments out there nobody wants to buy. And so if you want a cheap property, go and find one of those and offer somebody a low price to take it off their hands. You'll probably find some poor, desperate investor that is desperate to get rid of it. So you can go buy cheap property. The problem is, of course, with increasing supply to create affordability in this country, is that you are then helping people buy an asset that is highly probable to lose money. And I don't know any sane person, if they really understood that risk, would do it. Do you know?
Well, there's 2 points there. The first is, when you buy property, are you buying it as somewhere to live, or are you buying it as an appreciating asset, right? There is this fundamental, pull in two directions, right? Now, obviously, over the last couple of generations, people have got both. So they've had somewhere to live and they've seen this huge accumulation. My argument is most of that's simply because of the debt-driven economy that we've had. Interest rates have come down dramatically. Lending standards have been reduced. All those things have created this once in a generation move. It's probably not sustainable to continue it. So therefore, what happens next? Well, you don't have the same forces to continue the growth rate. Now, last year, with quantitative easing and even lower rates, we've had another kick up in the property market. That's why property prices are 20% higher in places than they were. But that's not real. That's an artificial stimulatory impact through government policy. Now, anybody who believes that price is a fair value at the moment on any long-term basis, I think is just on a different planet. It's not true. It's what the market currently is at, but that's a different point. So the chances of it doing the same again in the next 5 years, pretty low, I think.
I think that an issue too, like when you talk about the difference between choosing a place to live in and looking at an investment, is that I believe you need to look at your home as an investment as well as a home. And because it's such a big chunk of money and you're borrowing so much money to buy it, it's sort of silly just to think you're going to live in it forever. Because also, back to the affordability thing and back to the whole supply thing, that generally speaking, what they're trying to say is, oh, look, a first home buyer should buy an apartment just to get into the market. So it's their stepping stone. But the stepping stone only works if it actually leverages you up the ladder at some point. If you buy it and then it goes down in value and you get stuck there, you're not going anywhere. It's not a stepping stone to anywhere. It's your little path has one stone on it and you're on it and you're stuck there forever. So this is a bit of a problem with, I guess, the idea of affordability and get into the market on something small so that down the track you can get something bigger. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't actually work. And we've even had people in Home Buyer Academy that have actually done it once, lost money, and then had to go back to the drawing board and save a deposit all over again.
Yep.
Oh my God, I'm amazed at their resilience.
Yeah, well, I've been through 4 crashes. I think I may have said on one of the other shows, right? I lost money in a couple of them simply because I had to buy and sell at particular times. Now, that wasn't here in Australia, that was in the UK, but I know that prices can go down and you can actually be out of position, so it's worth just reflecting on that. Talking about first-time buyers, Justin asked this question, which is quite interesting. What are your thoughts on the new government grants in Victoria, 25% to help first home buyers? Does this keep the market stable or more inflated? So this is where it's equity share, basically. So in other words, taxpayers are now owning a share of first-time buyer properties to help them get in the market.
Now, I have to confess, I'm not 100% up on that, and I need to be. So I will look into that. But a few general ideas on that. For starters, anything that increases demand increases prices. So
what? You can't say that? That's. You mean first-time buyer grants don't actually help?
And look, here's the thing too. Okay, so I've done, I've written pieces on first-time buyer grants. We've got a whole. I think we've done a podcast on your first home buyer guide. Why you're not to rely on grants, right? Because everything is overinflated for more, you basically, the prices go up usually, and studies have shown this in various, the various introductions, various grants across the country, prices have gone up more than the grants value. And in some cases, there's builders that absorb it. And so they're taking it, not you. You think you're getting free money from the government, but then you're buying a property where all of that is built into the price. So you're not getting a discount. And then you've got nobody who wants to buy it off you when you want to sell it. Because, of course, if it's not brand new, the other first home buyers coming after you don't want to buy it because they don't get the grants. If it's not brand new, the investors don't want to buy it because they don't get the tax deductions that they get on a brand new property. So there's no incentive for the next lot of buyers to buy your property off you at a actual increased price, so therefore that's one of the reasons why the first time resale on brand new properties got such a high percentage that actually sells at a loss for that exact reason. There isn't the demand for it that there is for the brand new stuff, and that's artificial. So the government isn't helping you, they're helping the economy, they're helping the construction industry. The other thing too about that, and there's something I was reading something about New South Wales is talking about. It's a great initiative to sort of help with people getting into the housing market. The idea about rent to buy and those sorts of things, and there's percentage owned by the government, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to just laugh my head off, Martin, and I really thought you'd enjoy this. It actually said that they were going to, if you sell it back, you have to sell it back to the government into the pool so that someone like you can buy it, right? Which is great. Fantastic. Love that. Get this. They said they have to cap the capital growth that you could have, right? Capping it at 7.5% per annum. It's more than doubling every 10 years. They are really confident. They are super confident in the ability of these properties to outperform the good performers. I just thought that just made me laugh. I shouldn't laugh because it's great to see an initiative to help people get into the market and provide affordable housing, but at the same time, how ridiculous. Just someone who got no idea about property has come up with that idea.
Well, we've seen mega meddling, right, in the properties market in Australia, and by the way, in other places around the world for years and years and years, right? Sometimes I just wish they'd just go away and let the market be the market, right? Because if you actually had fair value and you had people, buying and selling at fair value, things would be a whole lot better, right? But that's not what we've got. We've got a highly cruel market, very much a political cross current, that probably is bubbling along on. And, just remind you that the Western Australian government plus the home builder was targeted at Homeland Packages. And on the day that was announced, the price of Homeland Packages went up by precisely the amount of the gross additional benefit that was there, right? So who won? Well, it wasn't the first-time buyer. It was the construction sector. And a lot of these initiatives, of course, are all about, as you say, helping the construction sector and helping the stamp duty and everything else, right? So it's all sort of tied up. But sometimes I just wish they'd all go away and just leave the property market to be the market.
I remember when the first $7,000, it seems ridiculous now, doesn't it? A $7,000 first home buyer grant came out in New South Wales, and it wasn't for just new property. This would have been in the very early 2000s, maybe 2003, somewhere around there. And it came in on the 1st of July this particular year. And all these first home buyers that we've been dealing with, they were like, no, we're not going to buy now. We're not going to buy, 28th of June or 17th of June or whatever. No, we're not going to buy. We're waiting till the 1st of July to get my $7,000. And of course, if enough people wait and then suddenly pile into the market, and I have looked at this data, going back there, and I remember when I did this research ages ago, yes, prices did bump up more than $7,000 overnight. Ridiculous. Anyway.
Is. Yeah, well, I can tell you that research around the world, and I've researched that I've done and other people have done, and I've worked with academics as well on this, shows that it's a zero net sum game, right? Any of those incentive programs simply just move the prices up, so all the boats in the harbour rise. Nobody actually wins, other than a few people might have been dragged forward, right, to buy something that perhaps they didn't necessarily want to buy. And your point earlier on about once you've bought a new place, a new homeland package, it's no longer new. So in the next suburb, there are now people building new homeland packages. So then you've got this asset that probably is not valued at what you thought it was valued anymore, because the ones down the road are still being built.
Well, they're squeaky and new, and this is the problem with endless land releases, and Melbourne in particular. It's apparently 100 k's from east to west. That's a big long tract of land. In fact, I was just in one of the Facebook groups today, and that I meddle in every now and then, making comments, asking questions. There was somebody that posted saying, "Oh, I've got this really good offer to buy this apartment in the inner city Melbourne." With a harbour view. But even then, just says the person's not local because there's no harbour in Melbourne. But with a harbour view, does it sound like a good investment? It sounds like such an opportunity to get a view. And I'm like, A, there's no harbour, but B, there's so many high rises. And when you got high rises, every apartment has a view. A view isn't scarce.
Correct.
In a high rise.
And do you know how much apartments in the Docklands area of Melbourne have dropped?
A lot, but I don't know the exact. What's the latest figure on those? Do you have anything handy?
It depends a little bit, but I in some areas I've looked at 20% falls again. Some rises if they're prestigious, but there's a lot of ordinary bog standard high rise. Very high vacancy rates as well. The vacancy rates are close to 15%.
Oh, I know. Yes, obviously, Melbourne in particular has been very hard hit by the overseas student. The dearth in overseas students. And I think, Victoria is the number one state, isn't it, for overseas students, I think? Right.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. And of course, they've been shut down for the longest, which doesn't help. Now, Jason asked me a question, which I just thank you for your super chat to Jason. Buying Bitcoin rather than actually. Now, I don't know that can be done in Australia at the moment. It's feasible to be done in some other markets. I did an article some weeks ago, but I've not seen anybody in Australia. But maybe different to Veronica.
I haven't heard of anybody buying. Oh, actually, I'm sure I did hear somebody buying property with Bitcoin. but only I've just anecdotal. I really couldn't. None of my clients are buying anything with Bitcoin.
No, I don't think there's a settlement process with Bitcoin in the Australian context that I'm aware of as yet. There is in some other places, in Hong Kong, for example, over in China and in the US. And in fact, there was an American transaction that was actually referring back to an Australian who invented a way of doing it in the US. I'll put a link below to the article that I covered it some time ago. But yeah, you know, and of course the question with and you settle in Bitcoin, well, if you settle now, it could be quite high, but if you go back 3 months, it'd be double the cost.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? What a risk, you know, if most property, certainly in New South Wales, if you're buying a property, the standard settlement is 42 days, you know, and in Victoria, you could choose sort of 30, 60 or 90. A lot can happen. A lot can happen when you've got such a money in a volatile asset such as Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, we won't go into the Bitcoin conversation now. I did a show earlier on that today. It upset a few people, but there you go. That's, you know, just to be clear, you know, I'm happy to upset anybody, right? Whether it's property or whether it's Bitcoin or wherever, right? Simply because I think it's important that people actually have a chance to get a more balanced view about things. Now, talking about balanced views, I had a load of questions about property buyers agents, right? And now I know that that's something you know an awful lot about, partly because, of course, down the track you've been involved in that very personally, but also, you know, your exposure to the industry gives you a great opportunity. Can we go through some of the basic principles, right? Let's start with what on earth is a buyer's agent anywhere? Because surprise, surprise, there's no standard definition and there's no real regulation.
No, it's quite alarming, actually. It really does annoy me. Okay, so a buyer's agent, let's talk about what one should be, okay? A buyer's agent is a licensed real estate agent who acts for buyers, not sellers. And so that means that you are represented as a buyer in that whole searching process, the evaluation process, the transaction process. So that's sort of fundamentally what it's meant to be, right? Unfortunately, the term is not regulated in any way. Yep. And so therefore you will have sales agents have assistants and their team that might work the buyer database and work with buyers, because that's sort of like the junior level on a sales agent side of things, and they'll often be called a buyer's agent or a buyer's representative, you know. And so, okay, that's what's the difference? They do it for free, and you know, and someone like me charges money for it. Well, I guess you always got to follow the money, don't you? Who are you paying, or who's paying the person? They tend to be the client, right? And if you're not paying, you tend to be the product. And if you're a buyer being served up to someone on a platter, then you know. So a lot of spruikers call themselves buyers. You know, they might not use the word buyer's agent, but they might sound like a buyer's agent, or they might sort of buyer's advisor. They might use a lot of sort of, you know, messy or muddy sort of terms. And effectively, they're actually selling. In fact, a lot of buyer's agents actually do this. They effectively sell from a book. So they've got a book of developer stock. And, you know, particularly in the investment space, they will give you loads of data that makes you think you're starry-eyed about what a great investment you're about to make. And for the price of a cup of coffee a day, you too can be a property investor. And those people call themselves buyer's agents quite often. So, yeah, if you want a buyer's agent, someone to actually represent you, you need to go and find someone who's exclusive, does not double dip, is only paid by you, and is a licensed real estate agent, depending on which jurisdiction they're in as to whether it's a licensed buyer's agent or a licensed real estate agent. And then you've got to quiz them on a whole bunch of stuff to work out if they're any good or not. But it's a real shame, because it's a very low barrier to entry. And I believe that given the value of property and the risk to an individual when they're buying a property, I think that the bar to entry should be a hell of a lot higher, personally.
Well, it's interesting when you think about the value of money that's being involved and you compare it with the hurdles that financial advisors have to go through for often giving advice on smaller portfolios. It surprises me that there isn't more regulation, but the regulation is non-existent. As you say, most of them will be real estate credentialed in some way, but that's about all.
But not only that, you can actually be a real estate advisor really without even being licensed. You know, you might not actually be acting as an actual buyer's agent. So it's all very muddy. And and I agree with you, Martin. But the problem is, in a way, on the flip side of that, so, a lot of financial planners will say they're overly regulated and the cost of their compliance is so high and onerous that the smaller player in the market, someone starting out, trying to find a financial planner who's any good, that's actually going to take you on because you're not lucrative enough for them.
Yep.
So it's a real problem. This over-regulation means that people who actually need advice early on, particularly in their, their working life, that's the time when you've got to set yourself up. You've got to start good habits. You've got to actually start learning this stuff. But how are you going to do that if the actual industry is so regulated that it's not in anybody's financial interest to actually provide you with a service? So you've got two ends of the spectrum here.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think the financial advice sector is over-regulated and myopic as well. So in fact, you don't often get very good results from, There are a few really good financial advisors, but there are a lot that aren't. I suspect the same is true with buyer's agents. There are a few really good buyer's agents who know their stuff and actually do the right thing and play by the client's rules, as it were. But then there are a whole lot that aren't, that sometimes have mixed motives, as you say, may be remunerated in rather weird ways. So you can't be sure about the quality of the advice that you're getting, right? And the point is that so often people reach for buyer's agents because they feel they need extra help. Going right back to our earlier conversation about the fact that this is a complicated thing to do, and you don't necessarily buy that many properties through your life, so you want a bit of help. I guess the other question I've got is that, when people ask me about buyer's agents, there's a couple of questions that often come up with, is there a minimum amount below which just isn't worth it because basically the costs are too high, relative to the transaction?
It's a really good question, and it's one of the reasons that Megan Wells, who's my co-founder at Home Buyer Academy, and I created Home Buyer Academy because, it sort of almost like under $1 million, it's really difficult to justify a buyer's agent. And then you get this crop of buyer's agents out there that are really low fee. And I'd hazard that just spend the time and money educating yourself, you'll make better decisions than going with a low fee buyer's agent. Because the problem with a low fee buyer's agent is that they've got to churn you out. Economically, they've got to actually go for volume in order to actually make any money. And so therefore they don't want you in books very long and they just want to buy quick. So there's a real disincentive. It's back to that, in a way, it's back to the problem with financial advisors and people starting out is that there's, you got to charge a certain amount of money in order to be able to afford to give good advice, if that makes sense. So it's a real problem. And so this is actually something that I personally am on a bit of a mission, not just Home Buyer Academy. Home Buyer Academy I'm so excited about it and I love doing it and creating what we create with Megan. But next year in particular, I really want to focus on helping people understand where they can go to get advice they can trust. And it's holistic as well, because the problem is, particularly with buyer's agents, right? You got two types of buyer's agents typically, right? One is apart from good ones and bad ones, you've got what they call sort of borderless buyer's agents. They're very data driven, and they basically come up with sort of these spots, areas that you should buy in, and then they go off and try and buy in these areas. So they're macro, hunters, if you like. Then you got the micro hunter. So they're the local specialists, and they're the ones that know that if you're going to buy in a certain area, they should be able to know, well, where are the good streets? What's a good asset? What's the good properties what's the good features and characteristics that a property needs to overperform in that particular area, right? So it's really, I think it's impossible actually to get a good combination of those two factors. So if you have done all your research on location and that's you're confident with what you've done, then you can choose a local buyer's agent. But there's not actually buyer's agents in every area of Australia that have that local experience. So it's actually quite difficult to work out, well, who do I go to? Who do I trust? And then you've got the mortgage brokers who give you buyer's agent advice because they sort of can, because no one's telling them they can't. And then also because buyers will ask them because they want help, right? So they hand out AVMs and all sorts of crap advice, it's like, don't do it. And then you've got you've got financial planners who may or may not want to help, people that aren't aren't high net worth individuals. So for someone who wants to make good decisions and pull in all the different elements that you need to consider, like the accounting space as well, pull in all these different elements to understand all the machinations to make good decisions, there's really no one source of truth.
No,
and
absolutely.
And so next year is the year that I want to start attracting. I want to be the magnet for the sources of truth, so that we can actually start creating a space where people can get information, and it's not all about self-interest. Anyway, so I'm going off a bit of a rant here. But
no. You're off your long run, but totally appropriate. And in fact, there was an interesting question that came up there from Cass. Is there a directory of proper buyer's agents, and where a potential buyer could see reviews and find transparent information?
Now, okay,
Discuss.
So there is an association which I'm a member of, REBA, the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association. Okay, so I think if a buyer's agent hasn't bothered to try to actually qualify for REBA membership, then almost you could sort of count them out because of the fact that they can't be bothered. And REBA does have a code of ethics, and as a minimum, they are exclusive buyer's agents, so they're not double dipping. And so I'm not going to guarantee everybody who's a REBA member is a good buyer's agent. I'm not, but I'm going to say that at least is a filter that you can start with, right? So you can go on their website. There's a directory there. There's not reviews per se in there. There are some commercial sites which do, I think you could Google best buyer's agent and you're going to find it. Don't rely on that, please, because anybody who's ranked on the best buyer's agent site has paid to rank on the best buyer's agent site. So, and it's a bit like some of these Rate My Agents and Open Agents and those on the sales side. It's hard to, once again, it's all about transparency. Have these people paid for their listing, these professionals paid for their position on the rank, their ranking position? Have they paid to be there, And if they have, then you can't rely on it. And if they haven't, great. But I'm not, I don't know which ones people aren't paying for. And, there you go. Look on one, and in Sydney, if it doesn't have my name on as a best buyer's agent, then you know. I'm having a lend here.
Yeah.
So it's challenging because there's a lot of these sites that are put forward, positioned as if they are the consumer's friend, the choice magazine of whatever, but they're not. They're a business in themselves, and that's their money making efforts. So the short answer is no. Sorry.
And just to clarify, Jeff said, do you say RBA?
Oh, no, REBA, REBAA. And if he's having a laugh, then I'll laugh because that's quite funny. No, I didn't say RBA. No.
That would be a new service. No, as you said, we'll put a link below, right, so people can actually find the service after. But there's no rating, there's no ranking,
no.
there's no user reviews. And one of the things I say to people is, if you actually are looking in a local area and you know people, ask them, because they might have somebody who actually knows the area, and a personal recommendation ain't bad actually sometimes.
So here's a tricky one, right? You could ask the local real estate agents. Now, this is fraught because once again, you've got to follow the money. Do they have a fiduciary relationship with said buyer's agent? Because a lot of them do have this another little backhanded kickback thing, right? So, and I do this because I want to know who the good operators are. And it's interesting, the conversations I have with some agents is very different to others. And so you have the conversation enough, you start to sort of get a sense for, are you being told someone's good purely because they give each other 20% kickback? Or are you being told they're good because, at the end of the day, they look after their client and they do a good job by their client? And one of the questions that I would always ask a buyer's agent, in fact, I do ask buyer's agents that we might consider partnering with, is how often do you tell somebody not to buy a property? Because there are not a lot of buyer's agents that go, oh, no, you shouldn't buy something. And I'll give you an example. I was on a Saturday, I was out looking at property and I bumped into a buyer's agent that I've known for many, many years. He's been around a long time. He's experienced, right? And, the next thing I was going to say, look for someone who's been around a long time, but then I'm going to shoot myself in the foot with this next story, because I was having a chat with him. We're talking about how hard the market is, commiserating and blah, 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 as you do. And he said, I had a client just miss out on his property around the corner from here the other day, and it was crazy price. It was nuts. And he said, and I went, the street, I knew the house. It was horrible. I went, oh, wow. Why do they want to buy that? And he said, oh, I know. I was really relieved they didn't get it. And I said, well, I don't understand. If they've got a buyer's agent and you knew it was a crap property, why did they want to go for it? And he said, well, I wasn't going to tell them it was crap. I couldn't tell them that I was happy that they didn't buy it. And what do you mean? He said, well, I was doing all the due diligence and helping them. So I couldn't tell them the truth. And I'm like, but what is your job? I can really go on a rant here. What is your role if that is the case? Anyway, only last Saturday I was driving past, because the open houses, we can have open houses again now in New South Wales. And I was driving up a busy road, and there was a queue of people outside this house on a busy road open for inspection. I don't buy on busy roads, by the way. There he is out front lining up to go and have a look at this property. And I'm like, that is a buyer's agent you don't want to pay, because you can make that dumb mistake all by yourself. You don't need to pay someone for the privilege of doing a dumb thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately. And the fact of the matter is that if you actually then put your trust in somebody who is actually, foundationally speaking, not really, looking after your best interests, that's going to just add more pain to the whole transaction, isn't it?
The thing is, though, most people don't work it out for years. They go to sell it. They lose the freedom to choose when they want to sell. If they buy a poor asset, buying in a hot market, they're going to overpay for it, starters. Everything sells in a hot market and everything sells for a premium. So if you're going to pay a premium, make sure it's a good bloody property. And so that if you have to sell it in some future period of time and it's not such a hot market, you'll always have a buyer for it, right? This isn't myth. I've got case study after case study after case study to demonstrate how this works. Up markets, down markets. I've got case studies that show some people make money in a falling market, while other people in the same market, having paid a similar amount of money at the beginning, lose money. You know what I mean? Two people, same market conditions, having two different results. So this is real. I can demonstrate this over and over and over again. So people who, go and pay for advice to make dumb decisions, that's just awful, just terrible.
And just to be clear, they might give you poor advice, but there's almost no recourse.
Right? No.
Yep.
There's none. And as I said, and this is the problem with getting referrals from your friends, because if your friend thinks that acquiring the property equals success, acquisition does not equal success, remember that. If your friend thinks I bought it, so therefore I'm successful, that buyer's agent helped me buy it, so therefore they did a good job, then they're going to recommend you to a buyer's agent who's shit and will actually help you make a shit decision too. And really the proof is in the pudding way down the track. And, and so this is why you've got to find someone who's a bit negative, just
realistic, not negative, realistic.
Well, you know what? Yeah, exactly. What you need, I'm highly optimistic, but anyway, what you need to do, I think if you're quizzing a buyer's agent, a really cool thing to do would pick a really shit property, pick two, pick a medium one and a shit one. Don't pick a good one. And just go and talk to them. Say, look, I'm curious to know how you would have advised me. Pick ones that have sold so they don't think you're trying to get free advice. And go, I'm just curious to know how you would have advised me if I brought these properties to you. See what they say.
That's a great idea.
I've only just thought of that one myself.
No,
how good is that?
That's really good. Yeah. We should copyright that. And one other question on this before we go off from buyer's agents. Obviously, there's a whole due diligence process if you're thinking about buying. I'm thinking of surveys and all the other mechanisms. How does the buyer's agent interact with the lawyer and with the surveyor and with the other people who might test other bits and pieces? How does that work?
Okay, so a good buyer's agent, another thing to ask if you're talking to a buyer's agent is, what is your process? I want to know all the things that you do when you are working through, advising me as to whether I should buy that property or not. So I know when in my business, for instance, we, thanks for the common sense comment there. When in my business, when we're looking at a property for a client, once we've seen it, on the surface of it, we like it, the client likes it, we're recommending it, we're never afraid to turn around and unrecommend the property we just recommended because of something we've uncovered, and that's really what they've got to be able to do and demonstrate that they can and will do that. And so working in with part of our whole process is to actually bring in the legal advice and the broker's advice and, if necessary, accountant's advice in particular, but also early on, so to head off any particular, or any potential reasons why they shouldn't buy that property, building and pest inspection, strata reports, reading the bloody things, actually reading them and commenting on them and actually pointing out things for the client, because the client doesn't read hundreds of them. But I know buyer's agents that don't even read them. They just get them, hand them over, and that's it. And I'm like, well, that's how are you adding value if you do that? Pricing the property properly, not pressing a button on RP data or giving them an AVM. That's just criminal in my view. You've got to index. You've got to actually go back and work out, well, if you're comparing to something that sold in June and now it's October, I've got to index it up or down depending on what the market's doing, because if I'm not realistically aligning my expectations to buying right here, right now with what the market is, I'm going to always be missing out, or I'm going to be always overpaying, one or the other. These common, they're not simple, but they're straightforward. I mean, they're really obvious in my view, and yet I will tell you, I actually got this iceberg diagram that I did up once. This info, what do you call it? Infogram? No, you don't call it
infographic.
That's it, infographic. Getting a bit Alzheimer in my old age. And I really went through the sort of the basic due diligence that a normal buyer does, which is very little. The basic due diligence that most buyers agents do, which is pretty basic, and then all the things that we do, which is just ridiculous. And I think we go over the top, to be quite frank. But you need to check what the neighbours are doing. You need to check if they haven't lodged a DA, could they lodge a DA? What could they get through? Is there complying development in that area? All this stuff that could impact on your future enjoyment of that property and the future value of that property. There's a whole myriad of stuff. In fact, if you want to learn all about the due diligence, do the Home Buyer Academy course, you'll learn all of it. But there is so much stuff that most average buyers don't do. And every time we have a client and we go through that due diligence process with the client, they're like, their eyes go goggle eyes, like, oh my God, I had no idea I should have checked that out. And yet a lot of this stuff is freely available, very easy to find out. And on this due diligence thing, one last thing, there's every state and territory in this country has different requirements for vendor disclosure. Okay, so there's things that a vendor has to disclose, and that will vary. Queensland, when Megan and I put together the Your First Home Buyer course, we went through state by state. Queensland is mortifyingly low. A mortifying lack of disclosure that is legislated up in Queensland. They call it buyer beware, and I tell you what, it is buyer beware. To buy up there without a buyer's agent that actually knows all of the stuff that you need to find out, and also to working with a lawyer or conveyancer to make sure that any offer you put forward has all the conditions that actually protect you in the event that they find something out, is absolutely essential. And I'm in New South Wales, you can probably bumble your way through it, and Victoria can bumble your way through it as well, because there's a lot more vendor disclosure. But up there, there's almost nothing. Phenomenal. And it's just a minefield. You wouldn't even know to check for certain, flood zones and water overflow, all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't even think of. And then you get stuck with a property that's underwater.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Queensland is particularly troublesome. It's interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day up in Queensland, and I went through. I've got sort of a bit of a checklist that I've developed. Here are some things you might want to think about. So, the flooding and the crime and the planning and the neighbours and a long, long list, right? And their jaw just dropped. And we hadn't thought about any of that. Okay.
They just think, seriously, most buyers just think, I'll get a building pest inspection and I'll get the contract. And even in Queensland, they don't even have a contract. So it's like you can't even get that checked by a lawyer. In New South Wales, you get the contract, or in Victoria, I think it's Section 32. I'll get that checked by a lawyer. Done.
I know. Well, repent at your leisure is what I sometimes say, because, I keep reminding people, I'll just say it again, Veronica, because I'm so, conscious of this. It's quite easy to get yourself into a property. If it's the wrong property, right, it's very hard to get out with your shirt, if you can get out at all. And I know a number of people, I've had a number of consultations with people who've bought the wrong property, and they've now, years later, realised they bought the wrong property, and they've got to make this hard decision, which is, okay, I'm going to cut my losses and get out, or I'm going to bumble along and hope that magically somebody's going to be the greater fool.
I tell you what's sort of interesting at the moment, because, I'm sure you're talking to a lot of people who are hurting now. Most of this country is in boom time. And if you've got a property that is losing money or treading water even, or only growing a little bit now, you're losing money. And there's a lot of people that would be. And that's not counting not having rent. That's your capital and your borrowing capacity and your opportunity cost, apart from your mental stress, just horrible.
Yep, absolutely. And, these things just grind on. So sometimes you have to make the tough decision and realise you've made a mistake and just get out. Just one last thing on buyers agents before we move on. This is from Raj. My buyer agent fee is 2.5% of purchase price. His pay is dependent on how much I pay for the investment property. So in other words, the more money you pay, the bigger the fee. Does that make sense? Yeah,
no, it doesn't. It's counterintuitive. And look, some buyers agents will charge a fixed fee, and others will charge a percentage like that. So the more you pay, the more you pay, which is like, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. Not only that, but 2.5% is, I think, very high. There's a lot of people out there that are very good at marketing, not very good at being a buyer's agent, but very good at marketing, that are charging 2.5%.
Yep.
And, I think, and look, I've always charged a fixed fee, and the fee will be determined, budget's got something to do with it, because it's all about the actual complexity of each individual search, right? That's how I've always charged in my business. So it's not just this schedule of fees based on your budget. But the whole idea of charging a fixed fee and then encouraging people to spend more, of course, in a rising market as well. I have to actually have the conversation with my clients often about, have you set your limit because you want to pay that, you think you should pay that, that's what you can afford, or because that's the maximum that you can afford? And, there's often people setting a limit where they feel comfortable, but the reality is they can't get what they want and what they need for that price. They do need to go and get more money. Well, as a buyer's agent, if my fee is based on how much you spend, I am so incentivized to actually encourage you to go and get more money, right? You've got to be very careful around this sort of stuff. So I'd be worried about, there's very good buyer's agents out there and they don't charge 2.5%. And I know some really crap ones that do. So I'd be very careful about that.
Yeah, absolutely right. And interestingly, the way I think about it is, do the calculation, right? Whatever, if it's a percentage, whatever it is, then think about what that translates to in terms of an hourly rate, right? Because that will tell you something about how much work they should be doing for you, right? And then ask the question, are they actually doing that, right? Okay,
here's the thing, though, on the hourly rate thing, right? So you've heard that story about the plumber that, I know I got really bad at remembering these little anecdotes, but, the plumber that knows how to actually fix something that's been bothering you for years and it's been leaking, causing all sorts of other problems under your house, and they come in and it only takes them 5 minutes. And his charge is like $900. And you go, $900 for 5 minutes? He goes, mate, that's 20 years of experience that told me I knew exactly what to fix.
Yep.
5 minutes of your time, 20 years of my time. So the hourly rate thing is, there's to a degree, you just think someone should not be charging $3,000 an hour to buy your property. But at the same time, I know the value that we bring our clients, for instance, I've started doing these one-on-ones too. I know you do the one-on-ones, and sometimes I do the one-on-ones with people. I've a limited number of one-on-ones I do, and I charge $5.95, like for an hour, and that between an hour and a half, right? And I'll go through and I call it a strategy session. It's basically designed to really point the next 3 steps they need to do and ask the right questions, getting people to ask the right questions and knowing the answers that you need to find out in order to actually to take, go in whatever direction you want to go in. And I think to myself, sometimes I've saved the people hundreds of thousands of dollars and all the payment was $5.95 because they were about to do something stupid. They would have shot themselves in the foot tax-wise, for instance. And I went, you know what, before you do that, go and talk to an accountant. Because if you do that in the wrong order, you could get yourself in trouble. Now, I'm not an accountant, can't give you advice on that, but I do know that this is an area where you better tread carefully. The very fact that, they paid me to tell them to go and see an accountant. And one did save. Their alternative would have cost them $200,000. That's just one that comes to my mind. Because people don't know what to do in the right order,
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I'm afraid I undercut you. On my,
you need to put your fees up, Martin.
I need to put my price up, don't I? Because I have to do the 3 or 4 hours research around the postcode as well as having the conversation. So
mate, you got to put your price up.
Let me just put this up from Jeff. Point of interest: a lot of information for buyers is accessible on the internet. You'll see I've nearly spent my pocket money, but thanks very much for the super chat. But yeah, absolutely, there is a lot of information out there, right? I refer people to things like the council maps, the flood maps, all those things. It's all there. If people know where to look.
It's not just where to look; it's what to look at. We actually did an episode on Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast. I should try and dredge up which number it is. I think we've only done 30 odd episodes, so it's not far. Just have a look for it anyway. And it's free sources of property advice. So it's actually a podcast episode specifically on that. And so we go through the best free sources, but not just go, there you go, look at that website. And then you go, well, what do I do here? It's what can you get and where do you look in those free sources? Because not every page on these free sources is really valuable. It's sort of a bit too much information, or it's too broad, or you know what I mean? So there's this whole, there's loads of information out there, but if you don't know what it is that you're after, if you don't know how to distill that information, if you don't know how to sort out the crap from the good stuff, you know what I mean? You just get yourself in a whole pickle and then you give up. And then you go and hire a buyer's agent doesn't know what they're doing. And lots of them do know what they're doing, by the way. Lots of them are very good.
And that's the problem, right? Because there are some that are really good and there are some that are absolutely awful, right? So the point and the message for the audience is, caveat emptor, right? Not just with buying the property, but actually with employing the buying agent and making the buyer's agent. Make sure you find one that has the right credentials and the right capacity to help you. Otherwise, you can get into deep doo-doo. And yet there's very little recourse if you actually, get the wrong one. So
the one thing I would say too, and this is really where I want to head next year, with sort of helping people find, as I said, that source of truth, is that with buyer's agents, this is a real failing of buyer's agents, and it's the strength and the weakness of the local specialist, right? You've heard that saying, if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I'm one of those rare people. Someone comes to me and says, what about investing in property? And, look, because in my business, right, we do the 10K radius of Sydney. I go, oh, well, that's great. That's the only place you can buy. You're mad to buy anywhere else. But, some people have got too much property in Sydney already, or they need to diversify. And so then I'll actually introduce them to a buyer's agent in a different area. But the problem is, even then, it's like, well, how am I determining what area they should be looking at? I'm just making some suggestions. And of course, if I send them up to Brisbane, the buyer's agent up there is going to get out their hammer and go, your nail looks like a Brisbane nail, Send them down to Adelaide, same deal. Oh yeah, I've got a few Adelaidean nails I can hit you with my Adelaide hammer. and this is a real problem with this industry, and I'm not having go at anybody for being like that, really, because it's a natural tendency. It's just what we do.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I do, of course, is I have data for every postcode across the country, right? And it's very granular data, and it also gives me quite a lot of information about things like rental yields and all those sorts of things, right? So that gives me the opportunity to look comparatively at different locations and different parts. And frankly, if I was looking at investment property, I probably wouldn't go close to Sydney or Melbourne. I'd probably go up to Queensland, or I'd go to Adelaide, or I'd go to Hobart, right? Because there the returns are just so much better. But go on. Yes, go on. But
that's a danger, to focus too much on rental yields.
Yes.
Because you're not going to get rich on an extra $100 a week rent. You buy property for capital growth, and you buy property early in your runway, not late in your runway. All these people trying to buy property when they're 50 because they want to retire in 10 years. It's like sort of left their runway just a little bit too late.
Absolutely, and that's why the capital growth element is still critical too, right? To be able to actually figure out how those things interact. But the point is that if you've actually settled on a particular little geographic area without huge rationale behind it, you could be actually missing opportunity. And there's always that thing about the opportunity cost, right? If you'd invested in Y rather than Z, you could have actually had a different outcome, 10 years down the track. That's the point.
I know. And the thing is, it's a one-trick pony, isn't it? I mean, like, at the end of the day, in a share market, you can actually diversify. You can't borrow as much. The real benefit of property, obviously, you can leverage. You can borrow to bloody hilt. You can't borrow 90% of your share portfolio. Well, I don't know if you can actually, but you wouldn't.
Well, you can
be bloody stupid.
Certainly leverage. Then you get margin calls, right?
Yes, as the GFC people after the GFC suffered big time. But so you typically can't borrow as much money to buy shares. Okay, so the leverage is a great opportunity with property, but you've got to get it right, because if you get it, you got one chance, to get it right.
Absolutely, and that's the point. Yes, very few people will have multiple properties, so therefore, spending the time and effort to do the work right on the way in will pay absolute dividends. That's
Treating
really the key
it with
message.
Respect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Respect. And it's funny because you often hear that adage, you make money when you buy a property. And the inference there is about the price you pay. And that's really not it at all. It's what you buy. It's the quality of the asset. If you pay 5% more than a property is, inverted commas, worth, and it's an A-grade asset, I'd rather do that every day of the week than get a bargain on a C-grade.
I want to put this one up from Jason. Thanks very much for the super chat once again, Jason. Does dummy bidding still exist at auctions these days, or did they stamp it out? I also agree Queensland disclosure is non-existent. Do you think they'll ever change it?
I don't know about that, but dummy bidding is an interesting one, right? So in September 2003 in New South Wales, legislation came in to the anti-dummy bidding legislation. It was never legal. Let me make you think that it was ever legal.
Yep.
But they put in legislation to actually make it even more difficult to be a dummy bidder, and so that meant registering to bid, etc., and increasing the penalties. It still happens every now and then, right? Still happens, but vastly less than it used to. In Victoria, you don't have to register to bid at auction. So I would suggest that potentially there's the potential for it to be easier to be a dummy bidder. And with the recent online auctions, I have really thought to myself, that is a lot less transparent. I know the platforms have done their best to, supposedly make it all, rigorous and whatever, but that is, there's a lot less transparency. So I wouldn't be surprised. Now, these days, there are still some agents that do habitually use dummy bidders. That absolutely is the case. I could even, I won't, but I can name some of them, right? I won't name them. But I know some that do, right? I also know that sometimes owners get a friend along and they don't tell the agent. And I heard about that very recently. In fact, it was a sales agent selling their property who brought in a dummy bidder and didn't tell the agent. And I heard a story on the grapevine around that. So it does happen. Yes, but nowhere near nowhere near as much as it used to. And there are ways to sort of tell a dummy bidder as well. Well, I can, but I guess that's because I've been at so many auctions. There's sometimes there's certain things that they do that gives away, there's certain ways that they bid. Often they're a bit too enthusiastic on the opening bid. That's can be a bit of a sign. No real bidder's enthusiastic on the opening bid. Unless they're a buyer's agent, maybe then they are.
Well, sometimes they shock and awe, but doesn't always work, right? Shock and awe.
No, I mean, I've had some mates. You're talking about those knock 'em dead bids.
Yeah, exactly right.
The knockout bid.
Yeah.
I've done a few of those in my time.
Yeah.
Strategically placed.
Yes.
It's not for the faint-hearted.
It can work, but you've got to be in the right property at the right point in the cycle. Yeah, and I don't know whether you realise this, but I actually used to work in the real estate industry years ago in the UK. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I've been around.
Been around the traps. Well, you wouldn't have been to many auctions.
Not in the UK. No, because auctions in the UK, there were a few because they tended to be very much the upper end of the market. The one-off, unique properties, but it was pretty unusual. I used to live in Bath in Somerset in the UK, so we had a lot of Georgian properties, which was quite interesting. So.
Very nice.
And I'll just acknowledge AI. Thank you very much for that super chat. Appreciate it. Okay, now there's a couple of things I just wanted to move on to, but one of the things that I really want to talk about is truth. Right? You've got a thing going, and I'll just display this. So this is your Truth, Trust, Transparency in the Property Industry survey. So let's talk about that, because this is really interesting, and all power to your elbow.
I've got a bee in my bonnet. I really do. Earlier in this year, it's funny, I keep a journal, and in February I even wrote in there, are my ethics out of alignment with my industry? And I really had this sort of existential challenge to think, what am I doing in this industry? Like, I just try so hard to do the right thing and help people, and I'm, unfortunately, I don't think, I think there's a lot of other very good people in the property industry. There really are, but I think the majority aren't. They self-interest is rife. And I just think that in order to make good decisions, we do need to get more. I'm doing this for free, Jeff, because it's my passion and I love Martin. I just think that there needs to be way more transparency in this industry. And I don't see that it's a bad thing for the industry. A lot of people in the industry, they couldn't cope with transparency because it doesn't, they can't function without it, with transparency. However, when you're buying property, it's so important. This entire economy of this country, as I've heard recently described, we have a property market with an economy bolted onto the side. The entire country is based on property in some regards, really. Yep. And individually, if you make good decisions, it can absolutely empower you and give you freedom in life, and in a way that really nothing else in the financial space, I think, can do. So for people to not be able to trust who they get advice from, that those people giving them advice is actually giving them advice in their best interest. But not only that, every man's got, and every woman's got a bloody opinion, and they're not, opinions like arseholes. Everyone's got one, right? And so no one's afraid to share them. So there's all this misinformation out there. It's just mortifying. So and then there's a whole industry that peddles off the belief and the fear that I'm missing out if I don't have a property. So there's all of this stuff out there. So I'm sort of now a bit waffly. But the point being here is that to make good decisions, you need to have trust in the people that you're getting information from. Transparency breeds trust, and we need to have more of the truth. And so I'm surveying people because I want to understand people's experiences. I want to really understand the root of this problem. I want to understand how it's impacting people at grassroots level, because I want to design a better solution. And I know that I'm not going to fix the world, but I have a bit of a big, hairy, a BHAG on this. I think there's got to be a better way. And for those who want a better way, I've got to lead the way. I want to lead the conversation in this area. So that's why I've put this survey together, and I've asked Martin if he'd share the link so that you can, if you're on this and you're interested in this and you actually want to help me by giving me some information about your experience in the whole property game, and not just real estate agents, by the way, anyone involved in property, then I'd love it if you fill out my survey. Thank you.
Yep. The links on the YouTube, and we'll make sure that it's on the site too. And the questions are actually quite thought-provoking. I had a quick look beforehand. So there's some really good questions there, and if you're thinking about property and think about the experience you've had, I think it's worth completing. So hopefully you get plenty of people who give you some feedback, because what you're talking about is pretty important.
Yeah, it is. It really is really important. I've also put in links to my three ebooks too. So you're not doing it for nothing. If you want something for nothing, just fill it out. And you can have one or none of them or all of them if you want. And I'm not trying to sell you anything either. Like I will keep your email just in case maybe I've got some information to send out, but I'm not actually trying to sell anything for this. This is really just for me to understand so that I can hopefully come up with a solution.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. Maybe you can share some of the findings in a future show.
Oh yeah, I will.
Rather fun.
I've started getting some responses, and they are really interesting.
Yes. Well, what I find interesting, because I survey people all the time on some of these property things, and people are very open with a lot of this stuff. I'm surprised, and part of it's, I think, because they realise that actually that there's a mutual benefit, right? If we can start getting some of this stuff out, and people begin to understand, then potentially it could make quite a big difference. I just want to answer this one from Taffy. You asked Taffy. Where did I buy? Actually, St Albans was the property that I had to sell at a loss. If I'd held on to it for another 20 years, I would have been a lot better off. But I had to sell because I came to Australia. I needed the money. So that was the story of that one. So I've been through, in the UK, 4 property corrections, and I lost money in 2 of them. So it just shows, prices don't always go up.
No, they don't. That's for sure.
Unless you're in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. Mind you, it's funny, we keep talking about corrections, and even when you think about the last boom, and the Sydney stats are obviously top of my head. We had the 5-year boom, went to from 2012 till middle of 2017, and then prices came off the boil 15%. It only took 9 months. That was over an 18-month period, and then it took 9 months for them to bounce back 12%. So on
average.
Yeah, and that's the macro, of course. This is the median price for Sydney. I'm not saying every property, and that's the thing too, isn't it?
It is.
That is the median. It's not every single bloody property. Some did more, some did less.
Yeah. And that is the point, actually, of course, that average on property, doesn't tell you anything, right? So these, I've complained fair bit about these indices that really just mislead people, because, every property is different.
It's sort of interesting though. I because when we in my buyer's agency business, when we evaluate a property, because we are so picky, we score properties on their capital growth, the potential for capital growth, not the amount of capital growth they should experience, but whether or not they should be on the plus side of the median, right? So we're gauging and scoring on characteristics that we know lead a property to perform better over time. And so it is sort of interesting. And when we price these properties, and then it's like little things like when the building inspector goes out, and we've got one guy we use more than often, and he keeps coming back and goes, oh, such a good house. And for a while there, I thought, I'm going to have to get rid of him because he's too positive. He's not negative enough, right? And then I realised, so I started asking about other properties that we weren't looking at, and then you bag it. And I realised that it's actually because we can pick good properties. But it's hilarious to think that for a while there I thought, oh, I've got to get rid of him.
Yeah.
He's not critical enough.
Well, it just shows you've got your initial filters on appropriately. That's very commendable, right?
But when we're adjusting, so I guess where I was getting to with the old, the median and growth rates and all the rest of it. So we do use an index, and I've tried various different ways of working out what index to use when we're adjusting prices, when we're comparing to a property we're looking at buying versus other recent sales, and got to factor them up, because if you can go up 2% a month, it doesn't take long before you're completely out if you don't index your properties. And we actually I've settled on the core logic macro data for Sydney. Like, I used to try to get it down to local government areas and suburb level, and stuff was all so complicated. Mm-hmm. And it was not reliable. The actual macro data is our pricing has become better since we've actually been using that metric. But that's what we use it for. And we're not saying that everything goes up. It's just that helps us gauge, the property we're looking at versus all these recent sales. Yeah,
and that's the point. You can't use it without appropriate understanding of how to plug it into your thinking process, right? You shouldn't just take the price off the wall and say, right, it says 50% higher, so therefore 15% is the answer, right?
Exactly.
It's a guide to help you make better decisions.
And on that, even further than that, so in a rising market, right, so I track, when we do a pricing analysis on a property, we always have, there's a band that we can sort of see that this is really where it should, and I use inverted commas there, right, should sit, right? And then either we buy it or somebody else buys it, but I track the price, the ultimate sale price. And usually it's competitive, certainly in the current market as well, right? So, and I track it, and I've separated out those that we go to auction on, that we have to go, usually we have to, sometimes we choose to, sort of got to be strategic on that as well. And from the ones that we've bought either off market or we've actually bought prior to auction. And the premium, and in a rising market, there's always a premium paid over even our research pricing. It's just the way it is. The premium above our research on the properties that we buy either off market or prior to auction is just over 2%. And the premium, if we go to auction at the moment, is just over 9%. But we're careful how we do pre-auction offers, and also I don't go crazy on off markets, because quite often they're overpriced too. So we've got to be very selective and careful what we're buying, obviously. So it's not like to say you've always got to buy pre-auction or you've always got to buy off market. But I tell you what, it does say something about the competition of auction, doesn't it?
Tells you something indeed. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I think that's worth taking on board and digesting, because I often get the similar question with people, auction versus not auction, and the answer is there's no simple solution, right?
No, there isn't, because even though there's obviously a case there to say right, well, let's try and buy everything prior to auction. It doesn't always work that way. You don't always have a willing agent or a willing vendor, or you have another, or sometimes going prior to auction can actually be worse because you don't have that transparency, so if you get another buyer take you on and you start in a blind price war, you don't really know whether you can trust the agent, you know what I mean? It's can be fraught. So we sort of got to warn our clients, we're going to go down this path. Strap yourself in. This might not feel like fun for a little while.
Now, as we come to the last 5 minutes of the conversation, I had a couple of questions earlier on from your polite cookie boy. Your perspective on the APRA change, they moved the base rate up, and also your perspective in terms of are buyers getting a bit more cautious given the prospective interest rate rises, or are you not seeing any of that coming through yet?
I wish. Okay, so first of all, with the APRA thing, it doesn't appear to be a particularly aggressive move on APRA's part. And so therefore it's like, okay, is that going to have any impact? Oh, I don't know. I certainly think that it might have an impact with first home buyers, because if anyone's stretched their max, as first home buyers tend to be, then it's going to knock maybe 5% off your borrowing capacity, right? If you are an investor and you're looking at borrowing 105% of the property's value, which is what investors typically do, and particularly if you're the first time investor and as soon as you've got some equity in your own home, you go and tap into that, which is what a lot of people think of, all these rising prices. Yeehaw, I'm going to tap into the equity. And, that's going to impact your borrowing capacity. But investors haven't come back into the market in great force yet anyway. They're typically a bit late to the party. So is it going to be a disincentive then? Is it going to serve as a disincentive for investors to sort of start entering the market in any great number? So for starters, it's impacting those two segments of the market. I think upgraders typically aren't borrowing. They've typically got a big chunk of equity, you know what I mean? So it's only going to be a small percentage, I would imagine, of upgraders where it's necessarily going to impact on their actual borrowing capacity. And even then, if it impacts on the actual borrowing capacity as a total, as a percentage of their total budget, it's less because they typically have a bigger chunk of equity going into an upgrade as well, you know what I mean? So therefore, it's not going to knock 5% off their budget. So all in all, I've had, I think, one client that thinks that maybe it affects them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because my conversations with people, it hasn't really impacted them so far. And the prospect of future interest rates, that hasn't really factored in, that I've heard of anybody yet who's been influenced by prospective higher rates, right? Rates are still so low, of course, and they remain very low. And in fact, the CBA cut their variable by 40 basis points the other day.
Well, because those big four, they love to fight each other for market share, don't they? There's also, I was watching Alan Kohler on the ABC News the other night, and he said something about the bond prices. I'm a bit confused about all this sort of stuff. You'd know way better than I do, but that he was sort of saying that maybe 5-year fixed rates might go up because the bond yields have gone up. Maybe, but the reality is that I think this big theme of what we've been talking about tonight is that we all short-term thinkers. And if interest rates are low now, we think, they're going to be like that forever. It's the old recency bias. So I don't get a lot of people, and also the RBA is still saying that they're going to keep it till 2024 anyway. So, I don't get a lot of people sort of really worried too much about that. They sort of think, let that's a problem for future Homer. Sure don't envy that guy.
No, and just remind people that fixed rates are already going up, particularly the 2, 3, 4 and 5 rates. So they're actually going up at the moment. And a lot of people who've moved to low rates, fixed rates, over the last 24 months or so will be on a really low rate. When they go to refinance that, they'll be paying a higher rate. So that's a future surprise. What also is happening is that people are being encouraged now to go to variable rates, but that means that it allows the banks then to move the rates up should in fact the market rates move higher, and the bond rates, the 5-year rate in particular, is definitely signalling higher rates ahead. So I think we're at that inflection point, and personally my own view is that we might get a rate rise prior to the RBA moving the cash rate.
Ooh, right. We heard it here first. Well, the banks have done that before, haven't they?
They have done it before, yeah. And if you think about the margin compression that they're experiencing at the moment, and the higher costs of international funding, and the term funding facility will be rolling off down the track. So there are a bunch of reasons why I think I'll be very interested to watch what happens. So, my perspective is this: if you can find a fixed rate that's a really good low fixed rate, it's probably the best rate you're going to get in this cycle, right? Whereas if you're on a variable rate, just remember variable rates can rise.
Do I remember my first mortgage, and the variables were always lower than the fixed? And because the idea was all about risk, right?
Yep.
So it's like you're taking less risk, and also it was coming off the back of people having 17% interest rates.
I know. It's all relative. Yeah, well,
who would have thought?
Who would have thought? But what's interesting about this, this whole point about the interest rate cycle is we're at the lowest level. Now, they may have to take rates even lower if the economy doesn't bounce back, and if the US doesn't bounce back. There are still fragilities there. We've still got China and Evergrande. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, right? But going back to where we came into this conversation, right, the level of uncertainty that we've got at the moment is probably as high as I've ever seen it, which means that you need to run the counterfactuals when you're making property purchasing decisions, right? What if rates were to rise? What if rates weren't to rise? Got to think those through.
I think I would focus people to look at the quality of the asset that they're buying, because even if it all goes to hell in a handbasket, the better quality asset you have, the least worst off you're going to be. Like if the whole market, if everything falls 40%, right? Steve Keen's true and your worst case scenarios ever come true, not everything will go down 40%. And it's a bit like median prices, right? Some stuff will go down a lot, some stuff will go down more, some stuff will go down less. You want the one that's cushioned. You want the sort of property that's not going to have that same impact. And it is true, it is possible to cushion your decisions by your asset selection. And if you've got a property that someone's always going to want, and it's not about having the multi-million-dollar beachfront, blah, blah, blah. It's about having the stuff that's really popular in the particular location that you're looking in, the most desirable, the most, the scarcity is around, the availability of that type of stock for people to buy and the desire amongst people to buy it. So that's where terrace houses and period houses are so good, for instance, because they can't build a period house anymore. You can't build a 1880 terrace anymore, and if it's particularly well renovated and well positioned, it's got north facing garden and all those other things that people really want, then that's always going to be in demand. And when there's lots of terraces on the market, the one that's got it's on the high side of the street with the level block of land, and it's got the parking, and it's got the north face, and it's got all the things, you tick box, tick, 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 tick. The property that doesn't have those compromises, that's the one that people are going to prioritise. And that's sort of the fundamental, try to buy those sort of properties. And they're in every price bracket and every market segment, there are those sorts of properties around. And that's really how to, recession-proof your property purchases.
Great advice. And as with all of these things, nobody quite knows what's going to happen, but it's worth thinking through. And what we've tried to underscore again is do the work on the way in. Don't cut corners, right? Ask the hard questions, because not all property is the same, right? Pretty simple, really.
I know. So simple.
Well, thank you very much for your time tonight, Veronica. It's great to have you on the stream and to have your insights. We've put the links and things below to all your various things, but the elephant in the room and the Buyers Academy and everything else, it's a lot of material out there, a lot of really helpful collateral. So thank you very much for your time, and we must do it again sometime down the track.
Absolutely. And I think talking about the survey results, that'd be very interesting.
Well, I would love you to have come back and share some of those results. It will be really interesting, because I love data, as you know.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Martin. I always love chatting, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat to your audience as well. So thank you so much.
Great. See you later. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.
Well, there we are. So that was great from Veronica. And thank you very much for staying with me at the end of the show. Just a couple of quick points. Steve Keen was mentioned. Shopper says Steve Keen is a very smart man. He's coming on live in about 3 weeks' time. So make that a diary entry. That should be fun. Steve will be on talking about some of the big economic questions, and he still thinks that property is overvalued. So, and he's talking about debt jubilees and things. So that should be fun. Just in terms of next week. Next week, I've got Damien Klassen on, and we're going to talk about the markets, investing, all of those good things, because, of course, there's a lot going on there. We'll probably touch on inflation, deflation, Evergrande, and a bunch of other things too. So mark your diaries there. And that should be another fun session. So I want to say thank you all very much for your spending time with us tonight. Thank you very much for all the super chats and all the comments. We didn't get to all the questions, but we got a good proportion of them. So take care. Have a great evening. And I'll look forward to seeing you on the show next week. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. Cheerio.